The footage begins in silence. A dimly lit bedroom. A man, fast asleep, unaware that his final moments are being recorded. The red light of the camera blinks steadily, watching, waiting. Outside the frame, whispered voices. A hushed breath. A slight shuffle of feet. Then, a quiet click. The sound of a door slowly closing. The kind of sound that means nothing in the middle of the night, until it does. What happened next was not a sudden act of rage. It was not the result of an argument that got out of hand. No. This was something planned. Practiced. A sequence of events carefully orchestrated by two teenagers who believed they had thought of everything. The evidence. A series of chilling recordings. A digital diary of their intentions. A timeline of a crime they were certain they could commit and walk away from. They even spoke about it, openly. Smiling. Laughing. As if taking a life was nothing more than a story they were writing together. They recorded their thoughts, their preparations, and, eventually, the moment when everything changed. The moment when a father, whose only mistake was trusting the wrong people, lost his life, while the camera kept rolling. By the time the authorities arrived, the crime was over. The house was still. The silence in the room was deafening. And yet, the most chilling discovery was not the scene itself. It was what had been left behind. Hours of footage. Files buried deep within a phone. Conversations, confessions, and, finally, the last, unbroken shot of a lifeless body, framed as if it were the final scene of a film they had directed themselves. This is the story of a father who never saw it coming. A daughter who became a stranger. And a case that left even the most seasoned investigators questioning how anyone, let alone two teenagers, could do what they did, and press record. Stay with us, as we unravel the truth behind one of the most disturbing cases ever caught on tape. It was the early hours of June 2, 2020, in Memphis, Tennessee. The city was still. The streets were empty. Inside a modest single-story home, the soft hum of a ceiling fan filled the quiet air. A man lay asleep in his bed, unaware that just down the hall, a camera had been turned on, its red recording light blinking steadily in the dark. Nathaniel Holloway, 58 years old, had spent the past 2 decades building a life for his only daughter, Bonnie Holloway. A single father, he worked tirelessly to give her the best he could. Friends described him as kind, devoted, the type of man who would give the shirt off his back to help someone in need. He had raised her alone, guiding her through childhood, celebrating every milestone. To the outside world, they were a typical father and daughter. But in the months leading up to that night, something had shifted. A growing distance. An unspoken tension. And then, there was Kenny Marshall, the one person who would change everything. Nathaniel had always been protective of Bonnie, but he trusted her. He believed in her. That trust would be his downfall. She had met Kenny Marshall at school, and from the moment they started dating, she was different. She stopped spending time with her father. She grew withdrawn. Her social media posts became unsettling, song lyrics about revenge, cryptic captions about feeling trapped, images of empty highways and open doors. Then, there were the messages. Investigators would later uncover them, hundreds of texts exchanged between the couple. Conversations that started as teenage rebellion but quickly turned into something much darker. What if he was gone? No one would ever know. We could finally be free. And then, plans. Discussions. Methods. A cold, calculated decision. At 2:30 a.m., the house was silent. Nathaniel was asleep. And 2 teenagers, Kenny had came in through the window at night, stood in the doorway of his bedroom, recording everything. Nathaniel had no reason to feel unsafe that night. His last known moments were painfully ordinary. He came home from work. He ate dinner. He scrolled through his phone, reading messages that never hinted at what was coming. Then, he turned off the lights and went to bed. Meanwhile, Bonnie and Kenny sat in another room, whispering. Texting. Checking the time. At 2:47 a.m., the plan was set into motion. The camera was positioned carefully, framing the doorway. A shadow moved across the screen. The sound of a deep breath. A quiet step forward. They had rehearsed this moment. They had fantasized about it. And now, they were ready to press record. The next morning, a neighbor noticed something was wrong. Nathaniel's car hadn't moved. The blinds were still drawn. By 8:14 a.m., a call came in. A voice, eerily calm, almost detached. There's a body. He's gone. When authorities arrived, they expected to find a tragedy. A medical emergency. Maybe even a break-in. But the moment they stepped inside, they knew this was something else entirely. The house was undisturbed. No forced entry. No signs of a struggle. And then, they found the phone. Buried under a pillow, as if someone had tried to hide it. The screen was still lit. A recording had been paused mid-play. They pressed play. And what they saw would haunt them forever. The crime scene was unsettling in its simplicity. Nothing appeared out of place, except for the lifeless body of Nathaniel Holloway, sprawled across his bed, a deep wound staining the sheets beneath him. There was no sign of forced entry. No sign of struggle. But then, investigators found the phone. At first, it seemed unremarkable. Just another smartphone buried beneath a pillow. But when detectives turned it on, the screen was frozen on a paused video, 2 hours and 14 minutes long. And as they pressed play, the entire room fell silent. The recording began in complete darkness. Whispering voices. Shuffling movements. The camera, placed low, capturing nothing but the outline of two figures standing in a dimly lit hallway. A quiet giggle. Then a hushed command. Shoo. He's gonna wake up. The video jumped. A glitch. And then, Nathaniel's bedroom. The camera, now in motion, trembled slightly in the hands of one of the teens. The dim glow of a phone screen barely illuminated the room. Another whisper. Tonight's the night. The voice belonged to Kenny Marshall. He was holding the camera. And beside him, Bonnie Holloway, barely visible in the dark. She wasn't scared. She wasn't hesitant. She was smiling. The footage was unlike anything detectives had ever seen. Not only was the murder documented, it had been planned. And this wasn't the first video. Investigators retrieved 6 more recordings, dating back 3 weeks before Nathaniel's death. Each clip revealed another chilling piece of the puzzle. May 10, 2020, a handheld video, filmed in Kenny's bedroom. He and Bonnie lay side by side, whispering. You know he's never gonna let us be together. Then we'll make sure he can't stop us. You really wanna do this? I love you. May 20, 2020, Bonnie, alone, speaking directly into the camera. He doesn't even know. He has no idea what's coming. Tonight, I almost did it. But I chickened out. I just have to be ready. Kenny says we'll do it together. May 30, 2020, Kenny holding a kitchen knife, laughing. This is all we need. Bonnie says he sleeps heavy. He won't even wake up. We do this, we're free. Then came the final video, the night of June 2nd. A hushed countdown. 3. 2. A deep breath. The bedroom door creaked open. And then, chaos. Bonnie had always been a bright, loving girl. But something changed when she met Kenny. Her best friend, Tasha Williams, would later recall how fast it happened. She stopped answering my texts. Stopped coming over. Every time I saw her, she was different, like she was lost in some kind of fantasy with him. A neighbor, who often saw Bonnie and Nathaniel outside, remembered the shift too. She used to wave at me when I was walking my dog. Always polite. But then, she just stopped. I saw her with that boy a couple times. He gave me a bad feeling. And Nathaniel himself had noticed. In a text exchange pulled from his phone, sent just 2 weeks before his murder, he messaged a friend, "I don't like the way she is with him. Something feels wrong. She's not my Bonnie anymore." But no one saw it coming. Not like this. By the time officers arrived, Bonnie was sitting in the living room. Her hands were clean. There were no tears. When they told her Nathaniel was gone, she blinked. Nothing. No reaction. But when they mentioned the phone, something shifted. Her breathing changed. Her fingers tightened on the armrest. "What phone?" she asked, voice flat. "The one we found in his room," an officer replied. Bonnie's face drained of color. I don't know anything about that." They hadn't even accused her yet. But Bonnie was already lying. Within hours, officers tracked down Kenny Marshall at his home. The moment they stepped inside, they knew they had their suspect. On his desk, his laptop, still open. A Google search stared back at them. How to delete videos permanently. Do deleted videos stay on the cloud? How to fake an alibi. They didn't need to ask him anything. The evidence was everywhere. And when they finally told him Nathaniel Holloway was dead, Kenny smirked. "Good," he said. That was all he said. Bonnie and Kenny thought they had committed the perfect crime. But in reality, they had left a trail so disturbing, so undeniable, that their fate was already sealed. And the most chilling part? The camera had been rolling the entire time. The evidence was overwhelming, but the deeper investigators dug, the more disturbing the picture became. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. Rehearsed. Executed with precision. And for the first time, detectives realized, Bonnie and Kenny weren't just trying to escape. They wanted to be remembered. Nathaniel Holloway never woke up, at least, not fully. The official autopsy report revealed the chilling details: cause of death, multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Time of death, estimated between 2:50 a.m. and 3:10 a.m. Fatal injury, a deep wound between the fourth and fifth ribs, puncturing the heart. Defensive wounds, none. That last part sent a shiver through investigators. Nathaniel hadn't even fought back. The medical examiner noted the presence of a sedative in his bloodstream. A common over-the-counter sleep aid, something that could be crushed into a drink, tasteless, unnoticed. Detectives would later find a nearly empty bottle in the kitchen trash, dusted with both Bonnie's and Kenny's fingerprints. Nathaniel had been drugged. Laid in bed. Defenseless. And when his breathing slowed, they struck. The knife, still slick with blood, was found at the bottom of the kitchen sink, hastily rinsed but not clean. It had come from his own home, taken from a wooden knife block on the counter. But what investigators didn't expect, what made even the most seasoned officers pause, was that this wasn't the first attempt. The phone found beneath the pillow held a 2-hour recording, but the most disturbing part wasn't what happened that night. It was the failed attempts before it. Investigators recovered deleted footage from the device, going back 3 weeks before Nathaniel's murder. The first attempt was on May 23. Bonnie was alone in her room, whispering into the camera. "I had the knife. I stood outside his door for 10 minutes. I couldn't do it. Not yet." The second attempt was on May 29. This time, the footage was darker, shakier. Kenny was holding the camera. Bonnie stood in Nathaniel's doorway, knife in hand. Her breathing was heavy. Kenny whispered, "Do it." Bonnie hesitated. She turned to the camera. I can't. She walked away. Kenny sighed. Next time, don't hesitate. Then came the final video, the one recorded the night of June 2nd. The camera was propped up against a stack of books, perfectly framing the bed where Nathaniel slept. At 2:47 a.m., Kenny entered the room first, moving carefully, slowly. Bonnie followed behind. She stood over her father for 13 seconds, staring. Then, in a single swift motion, Kenny pushed the knife into Nathaniel's chest. Nathaniel gasped, jolted awake, but his limbs were sluggish from the sedative. He tried to lift his arm. Bonnie grabbed his hand. Held it down. And then, she smiled. Nathaniel's last words were barely audible. Bonnie. His breathing slowed. And the recording ended. By the time detectives sat down with Kenny Marshall, they already knew the kind of person they were dealing with. Kenny wasn't just a troubled teen. He was obsessed. Consumed by the idea of committing the perfect crime. His online search history revealed chilling patterns: what serial killers never got caught. How to kill someone in their sleep. How to fake an alibi. Can police recover deleted messages? And then, one message sent to Bonnie just a day before the murder: no one will ever know it was us, unless we let them. Kenny had studied famous murder cases, idolizing those who had gotten away with it. He believed they would be just like them, smart enough, careful enough. But they had made one fatal mistake. They recorded everything. At first, Bonnie Holloway denied everything. She played the grieving daughter. The victim. I don't know why this happened. I was asleep. I didn't hear anything. Kenny, he must have done it. I had nothing to do with it. But then, detectives showed her the footage. Her expression barely changed. For a moment, she sat in silence, watching herself on screen. And then, she laughed. It wasn't a loud, hysterical laugh. It was quiet. Small. Almost like relief. Guess you got me. It's kind of funny, isn't it? He never saw it coming. The lead detective would later say it was one of the coldest confessions he had ever seen. Did she regret it? No. Did she miss her father? No. When asked why, Bonnie simply shrugged. Because I wanted to. And that's when investigators knew, this wasn't about love. This wasn't about escape. This was about control. And Bonnie never intended to get away with it. The arrest was the beginning of a long, drawn-out ordeal for everyone involved. It wasn't just Bonnie and Kenny who would pay the price for their horrific actions. It was the entire community that was left reeling from the unfathomable betrayal. But before the trial, before the headlines that would shock the world, there was one final, haunting detail: their interrogation footage. The footage from the police interrogation room was chilling in its own right. Detectives wasted no time. They were methodical, asking Bonnie questions, one after another. The first few were simple: where were you the night of June 2nd? Can you tell us what happened? But soon, as the weight of the evidence became clear, their tone shifted. They had seen the videos. They had seen the texts. They knew Bonnie's guilt. Bonnie sat there, stone-faced. Her hands were clenched. Her eyes darted to the door, as if wondering how much longer she would be trapped in this room. We know you were there. We know it was you and Kenny. You filmed the entire thing, Bonnie. How did it feel, knowing your father was sleeping and you were going to end his life? Bonnie stared at him, unblinking. I didn't. I didn't want him to die. Her words were empty. Then why did you do it? Bonnie's fingers twitched. For a moment, it seemed like she would break. But instead, she laughed again. Because we had to. He was in the way. He was in the way of what? Your future. Bonnie didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch out, heavy in the air. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she finally spoke. Kenny was the only one who made me feel like I mattered. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement. Kenny, when brought in for questioning, showed no remorse. He looked straight ahead during most of the interrogation, almost as if the cameras and detectives didn't exist. We did what we had to do. Nathaniel wouldn't have understood. He would have stopped us. We weren't gonna let him ruin everything. It was clear, Kenny had been leading the way. Bonnie, though complicit, had been manipulated by his promises of a life free from control. But Kenny wasn't just a manipulative boyfriend, he was an enigma. His unsettling calmness throughout the entire process made everyone question whether he had ever felt any emotion at all. The trial that followed was as tense and gripping as anyone could have predicted. The courtroom was packed, the media buzzing with anticipation. On one side, the Holloway family, devastated by the loss of Nathaniel and struggling to understand how their daughter could be involved. On the other side, the media, cameras flashing, capturing every moment. Key testimonies emerged, some gut-wrenching, some bewildering. Tasha Williams, Bonnie's best friend, broke down on the witness stand. She was my best friend. She used to talk to me about everything. We used to laugh, share secrets. And then, this boy came into her life, and she changed. But I never thought she would. Nathaniel's mother, heartbroken, clutched the railing as she spoke. How could my own daughter do this to her father? He loved her more than anything in this world. I don't understand it. I will never understand it. Then came the surprising twist, Bonnie's allegiance was questioned. Had she finally turned on Kenny? During her testimony, Bonnie's demeanor shifted. She suddenly began speaking with a sense of detachment, almost robotic. When asked about her feelings for Kenny, she seemed confused, unsure of whether she should protect him or turn against him. He was the one who said it had to be done. I didn't want to, but he told me we had no choice. But it wasn't enough. The prosecution emphasized that Bonnie wasn't a passive participant. She had been just as involved as Kenny, and the recordings proved it. You may have thought you were in control, that you were above the law, that you were free from the consequences of your actions. But you were wrong. You took a man's life, Bonnie. You betrayed the trust of the one person who would have done anything for you. This is not just a tragedy, it is an abomination, said the judge. Bonnie and Kenny were given death penalty. The courtroom erupted in gasps. A few people cried out in shock. At the sentencing hearing, the Holloway family gave their heartbreaking statements. Nathaniel's father, Harold Holloway, his voice trembling with disbelief, spoke first. I don't know how to feel anymore. You're my flesh and blood, Bonnie. My granddaughter. How could you do this? Why didn't you come to me for help? Why didn't you trust me? The grief in his voice was palpable. His granddaughter, the girl he had helped raise, loved, and supported, was now gone, replaced by a cold stranger. Nathaniel's mother added, tears streaking down her face, I've lost my son, but nothing compares to losing my granddaughter in this way. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at her the same. I don't know how I'm supposed to live with this. For Kenny, his family had given up hopes on him even before that very incident. While Bonnie and Kenny's fates were sealed, questions still lingered. Was there a third accomplice? Some believed Bonnie had confided in someone else, a friend who may have been involved or who had known of the plan and failed to report it. But no physical evidence was ever found to support this theory. Why did Bonnie and Kenny film the murder? Was it to relive the moment? To show off? Investigators theorized that Kenny was driven by a desire for immortality, to be remembered as someone who pulled off the perfect crime. Bonnie, however, was less clear, had she filmed it to impress Kenny or because, deep down, she was proud of what they'd done. As for what happened to the couple after the trial, their lives, much like their crime, took a dramatic turn. Kenny remained unrepentant, almost eerie in his calm acceptance of his fate. He had no remorse. He had done what he thought he needed to do. Bonnie, however, began to question everything. In letters sent from prison before her set date of execution, she began to speak about regret. Whether that regret was truly for what she had done, or simply for being caught, no one knew for sure. The case, however, would haunt the community forever. Nathaniel Holloway, a man who had only wanted the best for his daughter, was gone. And Bonnie, his only child, would live the rest of her life behind bars, a cautionary tale of how a seemingly perfect family could be destroyed by a single choice. And in the end, the chilling truth was clear: no one ever really knows what's going on inside someone else's mind. Do you think Bonnie was truly manipulated by Kenny, or was she the mastermind behind the whole plan? Could a father's death have been the result of his own daughter's obsession? Was this a tragic case of manipulation, or an intentional, calculated act? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If this story shocked you, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with your friends who are just as intrigued by true crime, and subscribe for more gripping stories that will leave you questioning everything.